My name is Eleanor, and I'm 90 years old. Yesterday was supposed to be the most special day of my life, my 90th birthday. Instead, it became the day I realized that the daughter I raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for had completely forgotten I existed. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the phone that never rang, waiting for a call that never came. The birthday cake I had bought for myself sat untouched on the kitchen counter, its single candle melting into the frosting like my hopes melted into despair. For weeks, I had been dropping hints. "My birthday is coming up," I'd say during our brief phone calls. 90 years. "Can you believe it?" She would respond with distracted uh-huhs and quickly change the subject to her problems, her work, her life. But I never imagined she would forget completely. Not this milestone. Not after everything I've done for her. I spent the entire day checking my phone, thinking maybe she was planning a surprise. Maybe she'd show up at my door with flowers and apologies. But as the hours ticked by and the sun began to set, the crushing reality hit me like a freight train. My only child, the person I had devoted my entire existence to, had forgotten the most important birthday of my life. The silence in my house was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own heartbreak echoing off the walls. I remember sitting in my favorite armchair, the one I bought when Sarah was in college, saving for months to afford it, and feeling like a ghost in my own life. The walls around me were covered with photographs of her achievements, graduation pictures, wedding photos, professional headshots from her law firm's website. Every single milestone of her life was documented and celebrated in my home, while I had become invisible in hers. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who used to make me elaborate birthday cards by hand, who would wake up early to bring me breakfast in bed, who would plan surprise parties with homemade decorations. I still have every single card she ever made me, stored carefully in a box upstairs. But now, at 90, when birthdays are precious and numbered, I had become so insignificant that she couldn't even remember the date that brought me into this world. I thought about calling her, reminding her gently, giving her a chance to apologize and make it right. But something deep inside me rebelled against that idea. Why should I have to remind my own daughter that I exist? Why should I have to beg for the basic courtesy that strangers show each other? The woman who had given birth to her, raised her, and loved her unconditionally deserved better than to grovel for acknowledgement on her 90th birthday. That night, as I blew out that single candle alone, I made a decision that would change everything. If I was invisible to her on the most important day of my life, then perhaps it was time for me to become invisible in ways she never expected. The woman who had given her everything was about to take it all away. But she doesn't know that yet. She has no idea what's coming. Let me tell you about the woman I used to be before the heartbreak, before the betrayal. I was a devoted mother who believed that love meant sacrifice, that being a good parent meant putting your child's needs before your own, always and without question. From the moment Sarah was born, she became my entire universe, my reason for breathing, my purpose for existing. I was a single mother. Sarah's father left when she was just 2 years old, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. So it was just the two of us against the world, and I was determined to give her everything she could ever want or need. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working as a seamstress during the day, just to afford her dance lessons, piano classes, and the best clothes money could buy. I remember those early years so vividly. I would come home exhausted, my hands raw from cleaning chemicals, and my back aching from hunching over a sewing machine for hours. But the moment I saw her little face light up when I walked through the door, every ounce of pain disappeared. I would help her with homework until midnight, pack her elaborate lunches with little notes telling her how much I loved her, and save every penny so she could go on school trips with her friends. The sacrifices I made were countless and constant. I wore the same 3 dresses for years so she could have new clothes for school. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have proper meals with vegetables and meat. When she wanted to join the debate team and needed professional coaching, I took on weekend shifts at a local diner, working 16-hour days just to pay for her lessons. My feet would swell so badly I could barely walk, but seeing her confidence grow made every step worth it. I never dated, never remarried, never even considered it. Every man who showed interest in me was measured against one question: would he be good for Sarah? And since none of them seemed worthy of disrupting the perfect life I was building for her, I remained alone. I convinced myself that she was all I needed, that her love and success would be enough to fill any emptiness in my heart. When she wanted to go to college, I took out loans I'm still paying off today. The interest rates were astronomical because I had no credit history. I had spent my entire adult life living paycheck to paycheck, never able to build the kind of financial foundation that banks respect. But I signed those papers anyway, mortgaging my future so she could have hers. When she needed a car, I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the only valuable thing I owned, the only connection I had to my own mother's memory. When she got married, I spent my entire life savings on her wedding, wanting it to be perfect, wanting her to have the fairy tale I never had. I planned every detail, from the flowers to the music, working with vendors for months to create the perfect day. I even took out a second mortgage on my house to pay for the reception she dreamed of. The debt nearly crushed me, but seeing her walk down that aisle in the dress I had helped design made every financial worry disappear. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I endured, was for her happiness, her success, her future. I thought I was building a foundation of love that would last forever. I thought the devotion I showed her would be returned when I needed it most. How naive I was. The change didn't happen overnight. It was subtle at first, like a slow poison seeping into our relationship. It started about 5 years ago, right after Sarah got her promotion at the law firm. Suddenly, she was too busy for our weekly dinners, too important for our long phone conversations, too sophisticated for the simple woman who had raised her. I began to notice the way she would sigh when I called, as if my voice was an inconvenience interrupting her important life. Our conversations became shorter, more mechanical. "How are you, Mom?" became a formality rather than genuine concern. When I would try to share stories about my day or my health concerns, she would cut me off with, "That's nice, Mom, but I really have to go." The holidays became particularly painful. She would show up late to family gatherings, spend most of the time on her phone, and leave early with excuses about work or social obligations. When I would ask about her life, her job, her friends, she would give me one-word answers as if sharing details with me was beneath her. The granddaughter who used to hang on my every word now treated me like a stranger at her own family gatherings. I started to feel like I was bothering her simply by existing. When I would suggest we spend time together, she would respond with, "Maybe next week, Mom." But next week never came. When I offered to help with anything, cooking, babysitting, household tasks, she would decline with barely concealed irritation, as if my help was more burden than blessing. The most painful part was watching her transform into someone I didn't recognize. The compassionate little girl who used to cry when she saw homeless people on the street had become a woman who looked at me with the same dismissive coldness she probably reserved for opposing counsel in her courtroom. She had learned to see people as obstacles or assets, and apparently I had been reclassified from the latter to the former. I remember one particularly devastating conversation when I mentioned that I was feeling lonely and asked if she might visit more often. Her response was clinical, almost cruel. "Mom, you need to develop your own interests and stop depending on me for entertainment. I have my own life to live." As if my desire to spend time with my only child was some kind of character flaw that needed correction. She began to critique everything about me. My clothes were outdated, my opinions were old-fashioned, my stories were repetitive. The woman who had once treasured every word I spoke now acted like my very presence was an embarrassment. She would correct my grammar in front of others, roll her eyes when I expressed opinions that differed from hers, and change the subject whenever I tried to share memories of her childhood. The woman I had raised to be strong and independent had become cold and dismissive toward the person who had made her strength possible. I began to feel like a relic from her past, something embarrassing she wanted to hide from her new, successful life. But I kept hoping, kept believing that deep down, she still loved me the way I loved her. I told myself this was just a phase, that success had temporarily blinded her to what really mattered, that eventually she would remember who had always been there for her. The coldness I had been feeling turned into outright cruelty about 2 years ago. It was during Sarah's housewarming party for her new mansion, the one she bought with the money from her partnership at the firm, the success I had helped make possible through all those years of sacrifice. I was so excited to see her new home, to celebrate her achievement, to feel proud of the woman I had raised. But from the moment I arrived, I felt like an unwelcome guest at my own daughter's party. She introduced me to her colleagues and friends with embarrassment in her voice, as if apologizing for my presence. "This is my mother," she would say with a forced smile, then quickly change the subject. I watched as she lavished attention on her friends' parents, asking about their travels, their hobbies, their opinions, while treating me like furniture in the corner. The worst moment came when one of her colleagues asked about her family, and Sarah actually said, "Oh, I don't really have much family. It's mostly just me." I was standing right there, close enough to touch her, and she had erased me from her life story completely. The pain was so sharp, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry in private. That night, I overheard her talking to her husband about me. "She's becoming such a burden," she said, not knowing I was listening from the kitchen. "Always calling, always wanting attention. I don't know what to do with her anymore." Her husband laughed and said, "Maybe it's time to put her somewhere." They were talking about putting me in a nursing home like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person who had devoted her life to their happiness. The humiliation continued at every family gathering after that. She would seat me at the far end of the table, away from the interesting conversations. When I would try to contribute to discussions, she would interrupt me or dismiss my comments with patronizing smiles. "Mom's getting a bit forgetful," she would say to explain away opinions she didn't want to hear, even though my mind was as sharp as ever. The invitations to family events became fewer and fewer. When I wasn't invited to her husband's birthday party, I asked why, and she said, "We wanted to keep it small, just close family." But I saw the photos on social media. Dozens of people celebrating, including distant relatives and casual friends. I wasn't close family anymore. I was an inconvenience to be managed. She began to treat me like a child who couldn't be trusted with adult responsibilities. She would speak to me in a condescending tone, explain simple concepts as if I were mentally impaired, and make decisions about my life without consulting me. When I mentioned that I was thinking about redecorating my living room, she said, "Mom, at your age, you shouldn't be making big decisions like that. Why don't you just leave things as they are?" The final straw came when she started lying to people about me. I discovered that she had been telling her friends and colleagues that I had dementia, that I was becoming difficult and confused. She was building a narrative that would justify whatever she was planning to do with me, painting me as a burden that any reasonable person would want to be rid of. The woman I had raised to value honesty and integrity was systematically destroying my reputation to make her own conscience feel better about abandoning me. The moment that shattered my heart completely happened 3 months ago, and it's a pain so deep I can barely speak about it without my voice breaking. Sarah and her husband decided they wanted to renovate their already perfect mansion, and they needed money. Instead of asking me for help or discussing it like a family, they went behind my back and tried to convince me to sell my house. The house I had lived in for 40 years, the house where I had raised her, the house filled with every precious memory of our life together. But it wasn't a gentle suggestion or a family discussion. They brought a real estate agent to my door without warning, presenting it as a done deal. "Mom, we found you a lovely little apartment," Sarah announced, walking into my living room like she owned the place. "It's much more manageable for someone your age. You don't need all this space anymore." The real estate agent began measuring rooms and taking photos while I stood there in shock. When I protested, when I said this was my home and I wasn't ready to leave, Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "Mom, you're being selfish," she snapped. "This house is too big for you. And frankly, it's wasted on someone who just sits here all day. We need the money for our renovation, and you need to start thinking practically about your future." Her husband chimed in with the cruelest words I've ever heard. "Eleanor, you're 90 years old. How much longer do you really think you'll be around? Why not help your family while you can actually make a difference?" They were talking about my death like it was a business opportunity, calculating how to profit from my mortality. What made it even worse was discovering that they had already been to see lawyers about having me declared incompetent. They had consulted with elder care attorneys about the fastest way to gain control of my assets, had researched nursing homes in the area, and had even looked into selling my house before I was dead. They weren't just planning to take my home. They were planning to take my entire life and independence. I learned all of this from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had seen the real estate agent taking photos of my house from the outside weeks before they brought him inside. She told me that Sarah had approached her, asking questions about my daily routine, whether I seemed confused or forgetful, whether I was taking proper care of myself. Sarah was building a case against me, gathering evidence to support her claim that I was no longer capable of living independently. The apartment they had chosen for me was a tiny, depressing place in a senior living facility across town. When I asked to see it, Sarah drove me there with barely concealed impatience. The room was smaller than my current bedroom, with no space for my furniture, my photographs, or any of the possessions that held meaning for me. "You'll be much happier here," she insisted, as if she had any idea what would make me happy. "There are activities and people your own age. You won't be so isolated." But I wasn't isolated by choice. I was isolated because she had systematically removed herself from my life, and now she wanted to complete the process by removing me from everything familiar and comforting. The woman who had once promised to take care of me when I got old was now trying to warehouse me so she could forget I existed entirely. That night, after they left with their real estate agent and their plans for my life, I sat in my kitchen and realized that the daughter I had loved unconditionally had become a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her desires. The woman I had sacrificed everything for was now trying to take away the last thing I had left: my home, my independence, my dignity. That's when I decided that if Sarah could forget I existed, if she could treat me like a burden to be disposed of, then perhaps it was time for me to forget about her too, but in ways she could never imagine. The game was about to change, and she had no idea that the helpless old woman she was trying to manipulate had been planning her own moves for longer than she could possibly suspect. Perfeito! Vou expandir os capítulos 6 ao 10, adicionando mais 2.500 caracteres em cada totalizando entre 9.800 e 10.500 caracteres por capítulo. What Sarah and her husband didn't know, what they could never have imagined in their wildest dreams, was that I had been preparing for this moment for over a decade. You see, I may be 90 years old, but I'm not the helpless, confused old woman they thought they were manipulating. I've been watching, learning, and most importantly, planning. It started 15 years ago, when I first noticed the subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. Call it mother's intuition, but something deep inside me whispered that I needed to protect myself. So I began to quietly, methodically, secure my future in ways that would shock them to their core. First, I changed my will. Not the obvious one that sits in my desk drawer, the one Sarah knows about, the one that leaves everything to her. No, I created a second will, a real will, with a different attorney in a different city. This will tells a very different story about who deserves my legacy and who has earned nothing but disappointment. But that was just the beginning. You see, that little old lady who supposedly just sits here all day has been very busy indeed. I've been investing, buying, and building a financial empire that would make Sarah's law firm partnership look like pocket change. Every month, I would take a portion of my Social Security and pension and invest it wisely. I studied the stock market like it was my religion, learned about real estate investments, and discovered that my decades of careful saving had given me far more power than anyone realized. I bought rental properties, 3 apartment buildings in the next town over, all managed through a company that Sarah has never heard of. I invested in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds through accounts she doesn't know exist. I even bought shares in her own law firm when they went public, becoming a silent partner in the very company that made her feel so superior to me. The house she wants to sell? It's not even mine anymore. I transferred ownership to a trust I created 5 years ago, a trust that she has no legal claim to. The apartment they want to force me into? I bought the entire building last year and have been collecting rent from every unit, including the one they thought they were trapping me in. But the most delicious part of my plan involves the very renovation they're so desperate to fund. You see, I've been quietly buying up the properties around their mansion, one by one. The house next door, the one across the street, even the vacant lot at the end of their block. I own them all. And I've been planning a very special surprise for their neighborhood. The irony is exquisite. While they were treating me like a burden, I was becoming their landlord. While they were planning to steal my home, I was buying theirs out from under them. The mortgage on their precious mansion? I bought that debt from the bank 6 months ago. Every payment they make goes directly into my pocket, and they have no idea. I've also been documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of humiliation has been carefully recorded in a journal that will serve as evidence of exactly why they deserve nothing from me. I've saved every text message, every voicemail, every email that shows their true feelings about me. When the time comes, there will be no doubt about who the real victim is in this story. I hired a private investigator to document their spending habits, their lifestyle, their plans for my money. I have photographs of them at expensive restaurants, receipts for luxury purchases, records of their conversations about what they would do with their inheritance. All of it will serve as evidence of their greed and their assumption that they could treat me terribly and still profit from my death. The woman they think is losing her mind has been 3 steps ahead of them this entire time. While they were planning to steal my home and my independence, I was planning to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. I've consulted with elder law attorneys, financial planners, and even a psychologist who specializes in family dynamics. Every aspect of my plan has been carefully crafted to be legally bulletproof and emotionally devastating. I've also been building relationships with organizations that help abused elderly people, learning about the epidemic of financial abuse that seniors face from their own families. My story isn't unique. There are thousands of elderly parents being manipulated and mistreated by greedy children who see them as nothing more than future inheritance checks. But my response will be unique, and it will serve as a warning to anyone who thinks they can abuse an elderly parent without consequences. The months following their attempt to force me out of my home were both the most painful and the most satisfying of my life. Painful because I had to watch my own daughter continue to treat me with contempt and cruelty, but satisfying because I knew that every insult, every dismissive gesture, every moment of arrogance was digging their grave deeper. They thought they had won. Sarah would call me occasionally, not out of love or concern, but to check on my progress in accepting their plans for my life. "Have you thought more about the apartment, Mom?" she would ask with fake sweetness. "The sooner we can get you settled, the better it will be for everyone." Everyone, of course, meaning them. Her husband became even bolder in his disrespect. He would visit my house and walk around like he already owned it, pointing out improvements they would make once I was gone. "This kitchen is so outdated," he would say, running his hands over the counters I had saved for months to afford. "We'll gut the whole thing, make it modern." He was already spending my money in his mind, already erasing every trace of my life from the home I had built with love and sacrifice. They began to treat me like I was already dead. At family gatherings, the few I was still invited to, they would talk about their renovation plans right in front of me, discussing how they would use the money from Mom's house as if I weren't sitting right there. They spoke about me in the third person even when I was in the room, as if I had already ceased to exist as a person with feelings and opinions. The most infuriating part was watching them play the role of the dutiful daughter and son-in-law in public. When other people were around, Sarah would suddenly become attentive and caring, asking about my health and my needs with Oscar-worthy performance. "We're just so worried about Mom living alone," she would say to neighbors and friends. "We're trying to convince her to move somewhere safer, but you know how stubborn elderly people can be." What they didn't know was that I had allies in places they never suspected. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, had become my eyes and ears, reporting back to me about their visits to my property when I wasn't home. She told me about the contractors they brought to estimate renovation costs, about the real estate agents they consulted, about property values, about the conversations they had in my driveway, about their plans for my future. I also discovered that they had been spreading lies about my mental state to justify their actions. Sarah had told several people that I was becoming confused and forgetful, that I was no longer capable of making sound decisions about my life. She was building a narrative that would make their theft of my home seem like an act of compassion rather than greed. They had no idea that I was using this time to finalize my preparations. While they were measuring my rooms and planning their future, I was meeting with lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors. I was putting the finishing touches on a plan that would turn their world upside down in ways they could never recover from. I watched them celebrate prematurely, throwing parties in their current home while talking about how much better their lives would be once they had my money to fund their dreams. Sarah bought expensive clothes and jewelry, confident that her inheritance was just around the corner. Her husband quit his job, planning to become a full-time house flipper with the capital they thought they were about to acquire. During this time, I also began reaching out to other family members and friends, people Sarah had systematically excluded from our lives over the years. I reconnected with cousins, old neighbors, and family friends who were shocked to learn how I was being treated. Many of them offered to help, to intervene, to speak to Sarah on my behalf, but I declined their offers. This was something I needed to handle myself, in my own way. Every day, I had to bite my tongue and play the role of the confused, helpless old woman they expected me to be. When they would explain their plans to me slowly and loudly, as if I were deaf or stupid, I would nod and smile, while inside I was counting down the days until their reckoning. The hardest part was the loneliness. Knowing what was coming, knowing that I was about to lose my daughter forever, even though she had already abandoned me emotionally. There were moments when I almost weakened, when I almost called off my plan and tried one more time to reach the little girl I had raised with so much love. But then I would remember her cruel words, her husband's calculating eyes, and the way they had tried to steal my home and my dignity, and my resolve would strengthen again. They had made their choice. Now they would live with the consequences, and I would finally be free. The day I had been planning for finally arrived, and it was even more satisfying than I had imagined. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah received the call that would change her life forever. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking my coffee and watching the birds in my garden, when my phone rang. It was Sarah, and for the first time in years, there was panic in her voice. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake," she said, her words tumbling over each other in confusion and fear. "I just got a call from a lawyer saying that there's been some change to your will, and something about the house. I don't understand what's happening." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment I had been waiting for. "Oh, that," I said calmly. "Yes, I suppose it's time we had a conversation about that." Within an hour, she was at my door with her husband, both of them looking like they had seen a ghost. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate confusion that would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. They sat across from me in my living room, the living room they had planned to gut and renovate, and waited for me to explain how their perfect plan had fallen apart. "You see," I began, my voice steady and calm, "I've been doing some planning of my own. While you were busy deciding what to do with my life and my possessions, I was busy making sure you would never get the chance." I pulled out a folder, thick with legal documents, and spread them across the coffee table between us. "This house? It's not mine anymore. I transferred it to a trust 5 years ago. You can't sell it, you can't force me out of it, and you certainly can't inherit it." Sarah's face went white. "What are you talking about? This is your house. You've lived here for 40 years. "I have lived here for 40 years, I agreed, "and I'll continue to live here for as long as I choose. But legally, this house belongs to a trust that will donate it to charity when I die. You'll never see a penny from it." Her husband leaned forward, his face red with anger. "You can't do this. We've been planning. We've already made commitments based on money that was never yours," I interrupted. "Money you assumed you would inherit from a woman you've treated like garbage for years. But that was just the beginning." I pulled out more documents, each one representing another piece of their shattered dreams. "The apartment you wanted to force me into? I own that building. In fact, I own several buildings, multiple investment accounts, and a portfolio worth more than you could imagine, none of which you will ever see." The revelation that followed was even more devastating. "Your mortgage," I said, watching their faces carefully. "The one on your precious mansion? I bought that debt from the bank 6 months ago. Every payment you've been making has been going directly to me, and now I'm calling it in." The color drained from both their faces as the implications hit them. Not only would they not inherit my wealth, but they were about to lose their own home to the woman they had tried to cheat. Sarah was crying now, ugly tears of shock and desperation. "Mom, please, there must be some misunderstanding. We can work this out. We can what?" I asked. "Pretend that you haven't spent the last 5 years treating me like a burden? Pretend that you didn't forget my 90th birthday? Pretend that you weren't planning to steal my home and warehouse me in a nursing facility?" I pulled out my journal, the one where I had documented every cruel moment, every dismissive comment, every plan they had made behind my back. "I have evidence of everything," I said. "Every conversation, every insult, every moment you treated me like I was already dead. any court in the country would understand exactly why I chose to disinherit you. The final blow came when I revealed the extent of my financial empire. You thought I was just a poor old woman living on Social Security and memories, but while you were building your career and your mansion, I was building something much more impressive. I'm worth more than $3 million, and every penny of it is going to charities that actually value human dignity and respect. Her husband stood up, his face twisted with rage. You vindictive old witch, you can't do this to us. We'll contest the will, we'll prove you're not competent. I smiled at him, the first genuine smile I had felt in years. Good luck with that. I have documentation of every cruel thing you've said to me, every plan you made behind my back, every moment you treated me like I was already dead. Any judge who sees that evidence will understand exactly why I chose to leave my fortune to organizations that help abandoned elderly people instead of the family that abandoned me. As they left my house that day, their world crumbling around them, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. Justice, it turns out, tastes sweeter than revenge. The aftermath of that revelation was swift and devastating. Within days, Sarah and her husband's carefully constructed life began to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. They had made so many plans based on money they thought they would inherit, had taken on so much debt assuming my estate would cover it, that when the truth came out, their financial destruction was immediate and complete. Her husband had quit his job months earlier, confident that he would soon have access to my supposed fortune. Now, with no income and massive debts from their lifestyle and planned renovations, they couldn't even make their mortgage payments. The mansion they were so proud of, the symbol of their success and superiority, went into foreclosure within 6 weeks. But the foreclosure was just the beginning of their troubles. Because I owned their mortgage, I had the legal right to accelerate the entire debt, demanding immediate payment in full. When they couldn't pay, and of course they couldn't, I initiated eviction proceedings. The same woman they had tried to force out of her home was now forcing them out of theirs. Sarah tried everything to change my mind. She showed up at my door with flowers, with apologies, with tears and promises that things would be different. But it was too late for that. You can't unspeak cruel words. You can't undo years of neglect and disrespect, and you certainly can't fake love when your inheritance depends on it. Mom, please, she begged during one of her visits. I know I haven't been the daughter you deserved, but we're family. Surely that means something. Family, I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. You mean like how you told people you didn't really have any family? Like how you forgot my 90th birthday? Like how you tried to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my home? She had no answer for that, because there was no answer. The damage was done, the trust was broken, and no amount of desperate apologies could repair what she had destroyed through years of cruelty and neglect. The most satisfying part was watching their social circle turn on them. When word got out about how they had treated me, about their failed scheme to steal my home and fortune, their friends and colleagues began to distance themselves. Nobody wants to associate with people who abuse elderly parents, especially when those people are also revealed to be incompetent financial planners who lost everything through their own greed. I made sure the story spread. I gave interviews to local newspapers about elder abuse, sharing my story as a cautionary tale. I spoke at community centers and senior groups, warning other elderly people about the signs of financial abuse from family members. Sarah's name and face became synonymous with elder abuse in our community. Sarah's law firm partnership was dissolved when her financial troubles became public knowledge. Apparently, having a partner who couldn't manage her own finances and who was involved in elder abuse allegations wasn't good for their reputation. She went from being a successful attorney to being unemployed and unemployable in a matter of months. The legal profession is small, and word travels fast. No reputable firm would hire someone with her reputation. She was forced to take a job as a paralegal, making a fraction of her former salary, and working for lawyers who used to be her peers. The humiliation was complete and public. They lost their house, their cars, their social standing, and their future. Everything they had built, everything they had planned, everything they thought they deserved, gone. And the most beautiful part was that it was entirely their own doing. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply refused to fund the lifestyle they had built on the assumption that they could treat me like garbage and still inherit my wealth. But even in their destruction, They couldn't accept responsibility for their actions. Sarah would call me, sometimes drunk, sometimes crying, always blaming me for their situation. "You've ruined our lives," she would say. "How could you do this to your own daughter?" "I didn't ruin your lives," I would reply calmly. "I simply chose not to reward the people who ruined mine." Her husband became increasingly desperate and threatening. He showed up at my house one night, drunk and angry, demanding that I reverse my decisions. "You owe us," he screamed from my front porch. "After everything we've done for you." I called the police, and he was arrested for trespassing and harassment. The restraining order I obtained against him was just another nail in the coffin of their respectability. The last time I saw them, they were moving out of their foreclosed mansion, loading their remaining possessions into a rented truck. Sarah looked older, broken, defeated. Her husband wouldn't even look at me. As they drove away from the life they had lost through their own cruelty and greed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Their destruction was complete, their lesson learned, and my revenge was sweeter than I had ever imagined possible. Now, 6 months after the day that changed everything, I sit in my beautiful home, the home I saved from their greedy hands, and I can honestly say I've never been happier. The weight of their contempt and cruelty has been lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I feel free to be myself again. The money I've accumulated over the years is being put to good use. I've established a foundation that helps elderly people who have been abandoned or abused by their families. Every week, I receive letters from seniors who have been helped by my foundation, people who were facing homelessness, who couldn't afford medical care, who were being mistreated by the very children they had raised and sacrificed for. Their gratitude means more to me than Sarah's love ever did, because it's genuine and earned. The Eleanor Morrison Foundation for Elder Justice has already helped over 200 families in its first 6 months of operation. We provide legal assistance to elderly people fighting financial abuse, emergency housing for seniors who have been abandoned by their families, and counseling services for those dealing with the emotional trauma of family betrayal. Every person we help is a victory against the kind of cruelty I endured. I've also reconnected with old friends and made new ones. Without the constant stress of Sarah's disapproval and cruelty, I've rediscovered parts of myself that I had forgotten existed. I've joined a book club, started taking art classes, and even began dating a wonderful man named Frank, who treats me with the respect and kindness I had almost forgotten I deserved. Frank is a widower, 78 years old, whose own children live across the country, but call him every week and visit twice a year. He's shown me what a healthy family relationship looks like, what it means to be valued and respected by the people you love. We spend our evenings talking about books, taking walks in the park, and planning trips to places I never thought I'd see. At 90, I'm experiencing a kind of happiness I never knew was possible. My health has improved dramatically since removing the toxic stress of my relationship with Sarah from my life. My doctor says I seem like a different person, more energetic, more positive, more engaged with life. It's amazing how much damage emotional abuse can do to your physical well-being, and how quickly you can heal once that poison is removed from your system. I've become something of a celebrity in the elder rights community. I speak at conferences, write articles for senior publications, and serve on the boards of several organizations dedicated to protecting elderly people from abuse. My story has inspired other seniors to stand up for themselves, to refuse to accept mistreatment from family members who see them as burdens rather than blessings. I think about Sarah sometimes, wonder if she's learned anything from losing everything, if she ever reflects on how her own actions led to her downfall. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she and her husband divorced. Apparently, financial stress and mutual blame destroyed their marriage as thoroughly as their greed destroyed their relationship with me. She's working as a paralegal now, a dramatic fall from her former partnership, living in a small apartment and struggling to rebuild her life. Part of me, the part that will always be her mother, feels sorry for her. But a larger part of me knows that this was the only way she would ever learn that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people cruelly and expect to be rewarded for it. Some lessons can only be learned through loss, and perhaps losing everything will teach her the value of the things that really matter. I've heard that she's been trying to rebuild her reputation, doing volunteer work with legal aid organizations and trying to distance herself from the scandal that destroyed her career. I hope she's genuinely changed, that she's learned to value people for who they are rather than what they can give her. But even if she has, it's too late for us. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. I've rewritten my will one final time, leaving specific instructions about my foundation and ensuring that my legacy will be one of helping others rather than enabling cruelty. The charities I've chosen will receive not just my money, but my story, a cautionary tale about the importance of treating elderly family members with dignity and respect. My house will become a transitional home for elderly people who have been abandoned by their families, a place where they can find safety, support, and the respect they deserve. The rooms where Sarah and her husband plan to erase my memory will instead become sanctuaries for people who have suffered the same kind of betrayal I endured. As I approach the end of my life, I'm proud of the choice I made. I chose justice over family loyalty, self-respect over unconditional forgiveness, and dignity over desperation. I refused to be a victim, refused to accept abuse simply because it came from someone I had loved unconditionally. To anyone listening to my story who might be facing similar treatment from their own family members, I want you to know that you have more power than you think. You don't have to accept cruelty simply because it comes from family. You don't have to reward bad behavior with inheritance or support, and you're never too old to stand up for yourself and demand the respect you deserve. My 90th birthday may have been forgotten by the daughter I raised, but it marked the beginning of the best chapter of my life. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you, even when those people share your blood. I forgot to leave Sarah in my will, but I remembered to leave myself a future worth living. And that, my friends, is the sweetest revenge of all.